Today I want to get into resource management theory, which is super important for survivability and optimization. Welcome to Pack Tactics, where there's 3 styles of resource management. And none of them are particularly wrong. You just adapt to which one is the most effective. And that changes from table to table, or even quest to quest. Let's start from the very beginning. Basic baby optimization. What is a resource? Normally people think of spell slots, number of times features, consumables, magic item charges, that sort of stuff. That's correct. But keep in mind, hit points and hit dice is also a resource that depletes. If you take too much damage and short rest in between the day, you'll eventually run out of hit dice. Once you're out, you can't heal on a short rest unless you use other means like second wind or whatever. As for hit points, that is your most precious resource of all. We don't really need to go on a deep dive on what happens when it reaches 0 or what death is, but it's incredibly important to acknowledge that this is your most important resource you have. Now let's move on to the next part. When should you spend a resource? Usually the answer is when you see difficulty, but that's not always the case in every fight. A lot of fights can be solved with cantrips, but that has a potential resource cost, because the fights become longer, which means enemies will have more chances to potentially do things to you, which can be doing damage to you. When they damage you, you lose hit points, which is, again, your most precious resource. You probably won't die, but having lower HP can potentially hurt you later in the adventuring day. Instead of thinking so small of just reacting to difficulty or seeing difficulty and acting appropriately from there, you should always be asking yourself, if I spend a powerful resource right now, will that save my other resources like hit points down the road? Will that save my teammates' resources? If I throw out a hypnotic pattern and shut down more than half the encounter, not only does the team potentially take less damage on average, they also spend less resources to solve the fight. They might not be spending anything because, well, the job's done. You guys are now in the cleanup phase. These big powerful features and spells are your safety tools. If you use them effectively, you save tons of other resources for yourself and your team. That's the goal. That's it for the basics. Now we're at the confusing part where everyone fights about what is the most optimal use of a resource, or resource management in general. The most truthful answer is, if everyone survived the day, then who cares? If the meme guy spamming fireballs every turn is placing his fireballs effectively, then that saves everyone else's resources for later fights. He's helping the team immensely through impact maximization, which brings us to the 3 styles of resource management in D&D. Tabletop Builds made an article about it, which makes my job really easy. Link in the description. Impact maximization, resource conservation, and progression maximization are the 3 resource management styles. What's so cool about tabletop games is every single table is different, which makes identifying which one is the most optimal hard in discussions. But through play, I think it's pretty easy when you know the styles. You just adapt to whichever kind of table you're playing at or specific things in the story. First, let's start with impact maximization. This one is the most popular, especially with new players. There's not too much thinking here besides using your resources at almost every opportunity you can in combat, like every turn. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll be fireballing single targets or spending unnecessary resources. Of course they think about resources, but they're more likely to pull the trigger than most optimizers would. And that is beneficial. It's got some risk, of course, but usually it turns out pretty optimized because, well, D&D is not really that hard of a game. There's tons of tables that just don't challenge your resources. The fireball guy is really a perfect example here, which is part of optimization, funnily enough. Even though impact maximization is usually viewed as a meme, especially in this sort of way, it's the most effective at tables that have 1 or 2 encounter days, or especially one-shots. There's no point in conserving resources when the number of encounters you'll have is small and predictable. A fight usually lasts 4 rounds, and in most cases with impact maximization, you'll cut that shorter, especially if everyone is doing it. Let's say you're a level 7 caster, like a wizard or druid or whatever. You have like what? 11 spell slots? And you have some number of time features. If the fights last 4 rounds, and you only have 2 encounters, you're usually only spending 1 single resource at a time every turn. You still have enough to keep going to the next fight. And even if you run out of everything, you've still done your job. You've impacted the first 2 encounters, or 3 encounters, quite effectively, or hopefully very effectively, with little resource loss from the party. So that means it's their time to shine while you stay in the back and fling cantrips. That comes with risks, of course, but usually this comes with huge strengths. Especially if you're playing with somebody who actually plays very conservatively. Which brings us to resource conservation, which is the second one. They are exactly the opposite. They question if it's necessary to expend a resource to win a fight. If they can cantrip down the fight, they will absolutely do it. They think about their resources for later fights like dungeon crawls, where they'll have like 8 or more encounters in the adventuring day. I used to play at a lot of those tables, but anyways, a dungeon or a long adventuring day itself can look like anything really. But if you can identify that you're going to have one, then this is the style you should go for. Also, by the way, there are tons of concentration spells that absolutely help you conserve resources a lot. One of the most popular examples is putting on Spirit Guardians, which last 10 minutes. Usually that's enough for a big chunk of content in a dungeon. It might even last all 8 encounters. And if it does, you've just basically spent 1 spell slot to accomplish this. And you can just keep on going to the next dungeon. I've seen parties do this, by the way. I was playing with 2 guys from Tabletop Builds. We went through a dungeon, and after the dungeon, we picked up a quest and went to the next area, and, well, it turned out there was another dungeon. And we did that one too, because we had the resources to keep going. Now, of course, there's more context to this. It's not that black and white. But it is absolutely true that those concentration spells are really nutty in this game. Like, oh my god. That is why a lot of optimizers focus heavily on making their concentration be impossible to break. It's to conserve resources for those brutally long days. And also, when you lose concentration, you have to reset the spell, and that's annoying. And expensive. I don't think I've talked about concentration in that kind of light. I feel like that's part of basic optimization, but anyways. I'm glad I got that out somewhere. Anyways, the last resource management style is progression maximization. This is where I usually lean, and surprisingly, it causes a lot of backlash in the wider community. It got me into optimization. It's sort of similar to impact maximization, but there's a lot more of a focus on ending the fight itself as fast as possible. That way you can progress the story faster. It's pretty much that straightforward. They're also more likely to avoid encounters just to progress. Resource conservation might do the same, but they're more likely to kill because, well, this specific fight might hurt them later, which means more resources might be lost later. Anyways, impact maximization cares more about having an impact in every single fight in a cool way, like lots of damage or throwing out a big cool spell. But progression maximization only cares about ending the danger right now. If there's an I win button, they will hit it every single time instantly, especially to save game time. And they don't care if it's flashy or not. You're only gaming for like 4 hours a week. Come on, progress the story. Less fighting, more roleplay. That's my attitude when it comes to this sort of style. Other optimizers, of course, look at this differently. These are the 3 styles of resource management. Most players are a mix of the 3, which is very good. I'm actually really happy about that. I think that is what you should be doing. The problem is knowing when to adapt to the correct style when it comes to optimization. All of them have their ups and downs, which Tabletop Builds have pointed out here. There is some extra stuff I can add here as well, like resource conservation is likely to craft magic items more, which is a huge positive. Also, progression maximization is more likely to wrench the controls out of the DM's hands. That's a negative but I don't think it's that big of a deal as the internet makes it out to be, because the DM will just throw the next encounter, who cares? But whatever. To sum it up in a quick way, impact and progression maximization is the best at one-shots and 1 or 2 encounter days, where resources don't really matter. Resource conservation is for the long adventuring days, 8 encounters or more in dungeon crawls. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dungeon, but you get the point. This is where resources truly matter. It's being challenged. It is impossible for me to guess your table and what situations you're in. This isn't Baldur's Gate 3 with set encounters. But I think when you understand resource management theory, like these 3 styles, then you know which one to adapt to at your table. Sometimes even at the table, it might have a random dungeon crawl with a long adventuring day. Then you have to change your resource management style. And then after that quest, when you have 1 or 2 encounter days regularly, you change your resource management to something else. Always use what you think is the most effective. End of video. Look guys, Kobold and Gator Dice, they're on Only Crits. Use the code GATOR for a 15% discount. Anyways, thank you for watching. Bye bye!